All right, guys. Today I am with Erin Kenney. She is the author of Rewire Your Gut. She has several podcasts. She's a registered dietitian with home base in Boston. And we're going to talk today about different things related to the gut, hopefully get into a little bit about fasting and just some of the different things she does, because she's got a really interesting approach to nutrition. So I'm real excited to talk with her. Erin, thanks. Can you give us a brief introduction?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian. On top of that, I have a master's degree in nutrition, and I really nerd out on science, one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm also a certified personal trainer and a holistic cannabis practitioner. So I have really taken my practice to the next level and really focus on addressing the root cause of why people don't feel well, whether it's gut imbalances, hormone imbalances, thyroid, to help them feel better. And I'm also very passionate about the mental health aspect of it as well.
I feel like if you're going to do gut things, you have to be passionate about the mental health side, right? Like they're just tangled together
You,
physiologically and more.
you cannot talk about one without talking about the other.
Yeah. So, just so I can better understand your practice and what you do, are you primarily an online based practitioner? Like, do you do most of your stuff virtual?
Yes. So I was probably 70% online and then the other percent mostly in person. And then after the pandemic, I just went 100% virtual. And it's been really great for my practice. I work with clients all over the country, not even just the United States. And I really niche mostly in gut health. That's my expertise, really stemming from my own journey with having my own gut issues. And also just because the gut is where 80% of your immune system is, it controls so much of your overall health. And so, yes, to answer your question in a long-winded way,
Yeah.
that is 100% virtual now.
No, but let's just dive into that. So the book is Rewire Your Gut. What does
Mhm.
that mean to you? Where did the idea come from, and what is it about?
Yes, absolutely. So the entire concept of rewiring in general, my business, so I'm the owner of Nutrition Rewired, which is my business name. And this entire concept of rewiring really does stem from my own journey of healing my own gut. So from a very young age, I was exposed to, lots of trauma and stress, lots of antibiotic use, different toxins. And through my own journey of healing, I was really focusing on getting to the root cause. So my issues were very much rooted, in again, some of these main issues, and creating new thought patterns, rewiring the way that I viewed obtaining optimal health and how I approach health is kind of where I came to the name Nutrition Rewired. And so I had digestive issues, but I also had mental health struggles. And so creating these new circuits and new patterns around how I was going to be healing was ultimately what led me to where I am today and why I decided to come up with that name.
Gotcha. So did you start as a dietitian or did you start on the personal training side? Like how did you tackle this problem that you were looking to address?
So I was actually still in school when I was addressing my own health issues. And it's actually why I decided to go to school for nutrition. There was nothing I was passionate about at the time. I was a full-time athlete for most of my life. So there was nothing I really got excited about. I liked sports. I liked being active. And so when I went to college, the reason why I chose nutrition was because I figured, if I'm wanting to learn more about my body and heal my own body, I may as well, invest in that. So it started in the nutrition and wellness space. And I actually did think that maybe I would go into personal training, and I did obtain my certification at that time and started my Instagram, really liked cooking and whatnot. But when I first chose a career, it was dietetics. I did go in, right out of school becoming a dietitian, but I did at one point think that I would just be a personal trainer or, maybe a physical therapist, but I realized that my true passion stemmed through the power of healing with food. And obviously, I still focus on the physical aspect of it. And I do coach clients on personal training, and I can create, nutrition and exercise plans together.
Yeah. And I think, obviously those two things go together. That's, as a physical therapist, that's why I'm so interested in the nutrition side. So many of our patients with chronic pain or some type of mental health component to their pain issues, almost always there's a systemic inflammatory component to that where, they hurt everywhere kind of a thing. And almost always that comes down to the gut, right? Like a lot of the times there is some digestive issue, belly pain going on with whatever else they're in my office for, which is what let me down this. All right, what's going on with all these gut health issues? Why does it, all my people with chronic pain and fibromyalgia, why do they also have irritable bowel or pick your diagnosis? And then from my own standpoint as well, right? We're always trying to improve the way we feel as well. So it's super interesting to me. For somebody that's not hasn't done as much homework on how the gut and mental health kind of link, what is your opinion there? And I've looked at some of the research personally, but how do you couch that to clients? How do you talk about the interchange between the two?
When I talk to clients about it, I'll usually kind of start to spark their memory of their own experiences of, when you had to give a presentation, did you kind of have that butterfly in your stomach type of feeling? Or, making the connection of when I'm really stressed, I'm more constipated, just kind of making those everyday, more obvious connections with them. And then I kind of start to explain the science of how your brain and your gut are physically connected through the vagus nerve, which carries an extensive range of signals from the digestive system to the brain. And then I start to talk about how the gut produces serotonin and GABA and melatonin, these neurotransmitters that make us feel good, and how those impact the gut and the brain. And then I talk about how 80% of your immune system is located in your gut, and how any sort of immune dysfunction in your gut will send signals to the brain. So starting with the everyday stuff, we all can think of examples. Maybe we haven't pieced together, that those symptoms are correlated with higher levels of stress or happiness or sadness, things like that. But then I will start talking about the science, and, they always find that interesting and fascinating to know, especially if you're someone who struggles with mental health issues. I mean, it can be so motivating to know that there is actually something that you can do dietary wise to help support your mental health issues.
Yeah. I always wonder if, like, chicken or egg kind of question, right? Like, does the high
Mhm.
sympathetic state, high stress cause the gut issues, or do you get exposed to something that causes gut and then that leads to different mental health issues? Um, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I'm sure it's a scenario based answer, but
I would say both scenarios would be true. Absolutely. If you have some, let's say you had like a big blow to your gut, maybe it's high doses of antibiotics, or maybe you took NSAIDs for a significant amount of time, or you weren't breastfed from a very young age. There's certain things that definitely, can predispose you to mental health issues or gut issues. And then, we see research that says people with autoimmune conditions have higher levels of Prevotella bacteria in the gut. And as you said, is it the chicken or the egg? Don't necessarily know the exact answer to that, but I would say that it's definitely true that you could probably be set up for, I'm not going to call it failure, but set up for these chronic conditions by having, an imbalance of bacteria in the gut. And then also, certain conditions can alter your gut. So I don't have unfortunately, like an exact answer of is it the chicken or the egg, but both the chicken and the egg matter.
yeah. So as a baseline, this idea of bacteria in the gut and this imbalance of bacteria, How does that happen? And then what are some of the steps as far as baseline steps that people need to look at as far as, what are the steps we need to take to fix things?
Mhm. There are many things that can cause imbalance in the gut. And I mean, if you look at the research and how many different things influence the gut, stress, I would say I like to bring that one up the most because it really is a silent killer. Like that's what people will turn, especially in the medical field, they'll say, stress is the silent killer. It really is. And when I say stress, I'm talking about mental, but I'm also talking about physical, dietary stress, nutrient deficiencies, just improper diet, improper blood sugar balance, antibiotic use, NSAIDs, different types of medications. If you look at if you ever picked up a medication from the pharmacy and they give you that little packet that no one actually reads, right? There's always a disclaimer of here are the side effects, and there's always a GI symptom listed because no matter what you put in your system, especially those types of pharmaceuticals, they do impact the gut microbiome. And then we have certain toxins, heavy metals like lead, cadmium, arsenic. We have things like endocrine disruptors, which can also alter the gut bacteria. We have some research that looks at glyphosate, one of the weed killers that, we use for agricultural purposes. We have the type of water that you're drinking might have PFAs, these types of chemicals, or also heavy metals. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would add to that. Toxins, diet, medications, and your mental health. Those are some really big influencers on the gut.
Yeah. You mentioned breastfeeding earlier, which is caught my attention because we got two little ones at home right now. I got a 2.5-year-old who had all kinds of belly issues,
Okay.
which got me into reading about gut microbiome for infants and toddlers and stuff. We ended up cutting, my wife was breastfeeding, so we cut dairy. My wife stopped eating dairy, and then everything got better. But she still, I feel, our daughter struggles with some different belly issues. And then we got a newborn who is currently breastfeeding, right? So it's always an interest. But what again, I try to read that stuff, but I don't have that background, right? My background comes from physical therapy. So I understand inflammatory markers and cytokines as it relates to pain. But when I start reading gut microbiome literature, it's like, this gets over my head real quick.
There's a lot. It's intense. And I will say that, not to discourage people because there are a lot of people who can't breastfeed. It's obviously a very personal experience, but I mean, even before you are addressing breastfeeding, like when the fetus is in utero, I mean, we are starting to develop the trajectory of their gut microbiome even before that. So it was actually thought in research that it's only once the baby is born that we start to develop like what their gut microbiome looks like. But now there's research that says that what a mother does when she's pregnant is already starting to change the microbiome of what that child's gut microbiome looks like. So I attended a webinar recently and they were talking about the benefits of taking probiotics throughout pregnancy. I won't go too much into it, but when you are breastfed, for example, the way that you're born, we'll start there. If you're vaginally born versus C-section, vaginal birth, your gut microbiome will then end up looking like the microbiome of the mother. If you are born via C-section, you skip that process. You are then going to have what they've seen as a less diverse microbiome, right? Because you're opened up into the delivery room. And they've shown that the bacteria of the child, the gut microbiome of the child born via C-section will mimic that of the delivery room. Now, what I will say is promising is that they've shown that the microbiome of that individual born via C-section might actually catch up. Like it at first isn't so great. So you might, not be so great in the first few months of life, but I forget what the time period is, but they've seen that you might actually be able to catch up, and breastfeeding can definitely help that because breast milk contains immunoglobulins that regulate a baby's immune system. It contains prebiotic fibers, so these beneficial types of carbohydrates that feed the beneficial gut bacteria. And then, of course, we have all the other nutrients that are in it that were obviously designed for optimal growth of the brain, the gut, the microbiome, and things like that. So those first few years of life are really essential to setting someone up for, reducing their risk of asthma or arthritis, different autoimmune diseases, setting them up for food sensitivities and allergies, obesity, even. So it's a long journey of kind of things that we're exposed to and practices of life that impact what our gut microbiome looks like.
So wild to me, like the differences between even a vaginal birth versus C-section, like it's crazy.
I know.
It's and we've had one of each. So our daughter was born naturally, and then we had a C-section the second time, and it'll be interesting to see, like, how one child gets sick versus the other versus gut. I don't know. The whole thing is, but they were talking about.
I ask my clients on their intake form what method of birth they were born,
Really?
and they're always like, why do you ask that? And I'm like, honestly, I'm kind of doing my own research study where and I do see, I see a lot of people who are born via C-section, and I see some, mental health, similarities between them. It's not a death sentence by any means, but it's just interesting. You see the difference that we've noticed in the literature, and it's fascinating.
Right. And I mean, the flip side to this whole conversation is if we didn't have C-section as an option, right, you would see less, infant mortality would go up, right? So, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, interesting.
Yes.
I had done some reading about, right now, for whatever reason, I'm into this insulin resistance phase, and I'm reading all about that kind of stuff, and even looking at insulin sensitivity for infants, and risk of obesity based on maternal obesity, and how insulin sensitive the mom was, and what that leads to the infant's insulin sensitivity and glucose regulation and stuff. Again, just I had a professor who used to say, choose your parents wisely. And but it rings true.
It really is true. I mean, there is so much, like I said, that webinar I attended, I mean, people were joining to learn more about, what the child can do, and what they ended up learning more about was what the mom can do. And there's a lot of pressure on us, as females, but at the end of the day, when you start thinking about pregnancy, I always tell my clients this. I say, are you ever interested in having children? They're like, yeah, but not for another 2 years or so. I say, well, we got to start thinking about it now. Like, this is the time to start, eating well, making sure your gut's healthy, address any thyroid issues. Like, the time is now, not, 2 years down the road when it happens. If we can, there's humans. So
the balance is very unfair between men and women in parenting, as far as like in childbirth. Like, we really don't. It's a very unfair equation.
Yeah, but I've heard like the opposite side of like men saying things like they're kind of jealous of the experience and things like that. And so I don't know, some people look at it different ways. I could sympathize with both.
If I said that to my wife, she would just punch me in the face, probably.
Yeah, I don't have kids yet. I haven't got their job, so I could imagine that wouldn't be a great topic of conversation.
Yeah, I'm not going to bring that one up. No.
Smart.
So again, doing kind of some of my own research, it's interesting how different foods and different diet plans may affect the gut microbiome. And so, again, not talking specifically to any conditions, but how do, like, say a carnivore diet where people are keto diet, where it's a more higher protein, higher fat kind of composition diet, versus somebody that's doing, standard American diet versus, a grain-based or even a vegetarian type diet. How will those kind of gross differences affect the gut microbiome?
Great question. With a carnivore diet, you're lacking a lot of those prebiotics, right? So you're not going to see lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And those groups of foods are feeders. Those feed bacteria. They keep bacteria alive. And so when you're on more of a carnivore style diet, which what they've seen, the research is that it can create a less diverse gut microbiome. But it really depends on what the person's gut was when they started the diet. Like if someone had, for example, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and then they started a carnivore diet, so they're not feeding that overgrowth anymore, they might look at that person's gut microbiome and say, oh, it looks really good, really healthy, because they are masking a root cause symptom, if that makes sense. With a plant-based diet, you're eating lots of fiber, you're eating lots of prebiotic foods, which are going to feed the bacteria. So what we would suspect, and what we've seen in the research is that creates a more diverse gut microbiome because it's food for the bacteria that live there and it's keeping them alive. And what happens is once they're there in the small intestine and then they move to the large intestine, they become those fibers and those undigested plant sources, they become food and they ferment, and that creates different byproducts like short chain fatty acids and butyrate, which help to reduce inflammation in the gut and strengthen the gut lining. So the main difference is that with a carnivore diet, meat and animal products, they're not feeders of bacteria per se. I mean, there's more to that than just that sentence, but they're not serving as a prebiotic. They don't feed those bacteria. So they have less of an impact on the bacterial compositions, whereas a plant-based diet really does. It would typically cause more diversity in the gut because there's more feeding going on, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Can you clarify what Sibo is? All of a sudden, I'm hearing about it all the time. I feel like I never heard about it, and now I've heard about it mentioned just multiple times in the last 6 months. So what is it and then I want to circle back to what we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. Sibo is actually quite common, and it is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's exactly what it sounds like. When we look at the GI tract, we have the small intestine, and then right below it is the large intestine, and that's when food exits the body. Now, the bacteria that we are talking about in Sibo are bacteria that have migrated from the large intestine, the lower part, into the small intestine. So they've moved up and they are sitting in a place that they shouldn't be. And so that's an issue because what happens in the small intestine is we absorb a lot of nutrients and vitamins. That's the main place where we absorb B12 and iron and zinc and all those vitamins. And when you have disruption in that environment, we can start to see nutrient deficiencies, and there's a lot of fermentation going on. I mentioned how when the food gets to the lower part of the GI tract, it ferments. Now, if things are fermenting where they shouldn't be, we're going to see gas, we're going to see bloating, we're going to start to see maybe anxiety and depression because, again, that gut brain connection, we might start to see more food sensitivities. So it's a very common thing, but it's also associated with some not so great health outcomes down the road, especially because, like I mentioned, we have these bacteria where they shouldn't be, and that can create inflammation in the body.
So is that why, like, when people talk about carnivore or they talk about a Whole30 or other elimination classification of diet, do you think that's what's happening, that people are finding success with these diets, is it's eliminating some of these bacterial overgrowths? Or do you think it's more of a food sensitivity allergy thing?
So with a carnivore diet, that is kind of my hypothesis with Sibo, is these people could have Sibo, and what they're doing is they're just finding that if they just don't feed them at all, then it won't be an issue. They're treating that symptom. With the Whole30 and those types of diets, I think the reason that those work are because they do address some of the most common sensitivities. So soy, dairy, gluten, processed sugars, alcohol. Nobody feels great when they consume those things. A true low Fodmap diet. Have you ever heard of the low Fodmap diet before?
I have, but go ahead and I've heard of it. I don't know that I know it as in detail as I should. So if you could explain it, that'd be great.
Yeah. So for your listeners, the FODMAPs are a group of type of carbohydrate that are, again, those feeders. They are undigested, really. They're poorly digested in the gut, and they then feed bacteria. And if you have an overgrowth, we don't want to keep feeding those bacteria if you're uncomfortable, if you have symptoms. So a carnivore diet and a low FODMAP diet would be two examples of diets that are not feeding those bacteria. The Whole30 elimination style diets, those are really more designed for people that are looking to identify food sensitivities, consume the Whole30, I would say specifically, is consuming less processed foods. Well, actually, most elimination diets, you're consuming less processed food. So overall, I think people feel better for multiple reasons, but it's also more so just addressing major allergens or major food sensitivities like the ones I mentioned.
Yeah. What is the like what is a food sensitivity? Like when people are like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
sensitive to this. And like I know myself personally, I did a our family does this like silly weight loss challenge almost every year between Thanksgiving and Easter. And we have to do it every year because nobody keeps the weight off. So we just run it back every year. I have a cousin that calls it the fat tax. Like you just pay it every year. But that's beside the
That's
point.
so good.
I so the one year I did a paleo Whole30 style. That was like kind of what I did. This is probably going back at least 8 years. And when I
Mhm.
reintroduced dairy and gluten, I had lost some weight, my skin cleared up, my blood pressure had dropped. And then I reintroduced dairy and gluten, and like my stomach hurts, my blood pressure comes back up. I was sweating all the time. And I was like, this is weird. And so I've kind of recreated mini experiments, and I probably haven't done gluten or dairy for, a good 5, maybe more years at this point. What is I don't think I have celiac. I don't get any kind of like weird digestive stuff. It just, I don't feel as good. Um, Sinus infections were the other thing. I was on medications constantly, and I haven't had
Mm.
a sinus infection since I stopped doing dairy. What is a food sensitivity? And then what are the differences between this, idea of a bacterial or gut microbiome imbalance versus you're dealing with a food sensitivity and how that
Mm.
relates to inflammation?
So these imbalances can actually create food sensitivities. Leading into what a food sensitivity is, it doesn't actually have a standard medical definition. Sometimes it's referred to as a food intolerance, so like an IgG or an IgA response. And these food sensitivities are actually much more common among people who have conditions like irritable bowel syndrome. And the thought there, well, the science there really is that when you have any sort of stress or irritation in the gut, that can lead to leaky gut. And that is now a recognized medical diagnosis is intestinal hyperpermeability. So if you think of, a tube, let's say it's like a hose, for example, as your digestive tract, if you were to puncture little holes in that, in that hose, water would come through the hose where it's not supposed to be. So that means that in your gut, things would be moving from your gut into your bloodstream, and they're not supposed to be there. So I say this to clients all the time because they say, I'm sensitive to this and I'm sensitive to that. And then when we heal their gut, they're saying, oh, it feels like I can tolerate, dairy more, or, and of course it depends on the type, right? I have tons of clients who cannot eat cheese, but can eat a fermented kefir, for example. But back to the point of the food sensitivities, if you have any sort of gut inflammation or intestinal hyperpermeability, your immune system is reacting to the fact that something that was in your digestive tract moved into the blood and should not have been there. And so the goal there is to heal and seal up that gut, reduce the inflammation, and then optimally you would, have a food sensitivity that would not irritate you anymore. Now, food sensitivity testing has become super common, And unfortunately, it's just not recommended by the major, organizations who specialize in food allergies. They have not found enough evidence to support the use of these types of tests. So elimination diet is really the standard protocol. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a gut imbalance to have food sensitivity. Some people have hormone imbalance and therefore soy irritates them because they are very sensitive from a hormonal perspective. There are some people who have thyroid issues and therefore they might not do well with gluten because gluten, the protein in gluten looks very similar to the thyroid, and their body recognizes that from an immune perspective there. So I know I'm kind of rambling again a little bit, but this is the way that nutrition and integrative nutrition works. Is it's very complicated, but food sensitivities are complex. And you mentioned GI symptoms, like, oh, I didn't have any like significant GI symptoms. You don't have to have any GI symptoms to have a food sensitivity. You could be, like you said, tired. You could have migraines. You could have a runny nose, like constant postnasal drip. You could get ear infections. You could have joint pain. Those are all symptoms of food sensitivity, but the food itself isn't always the root cause of why you're reacting to it. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you're basically saying that, and this is super interesting to me. So the permeability of the gut and maybe that microbiome is probably what's playing into that sensitivity, not necessarily the food itself.
Oftentimes that's the case.
I mean, to me, that, like, from my personal experience, that makes a ton of sense. Like, I don't know, when I was younger, like high school, college, I used to do a ton of dairy. Like, I used to have cottage cheese or yogurt and then go work out. Like, it wouldn't bother me at all. But I also had sinus infections all the time. So like, I've kind of weighed this, like, did this just happen when I got older, or is this why I've had sinus infections my whole life?
I had sinus infections my entire life, and it was dairy for me too. And I work with some athletes who are like Olympic level athletes. And if you look at the research, you can induce a food sensitivity by exercising. So think of it this way. Like you just said, the example of how you would eat cottage cheese, then go work out. You could, if you eat something right before a period of stress, exercise is a stress. It can cause leaky gut temporarily even. You can create a food sensitivity by putting a food and a stressor together. And then your body remembers, okay, it was really stressed during that time. We're now going to kind of hyper react to this food. If that makes sense.
Very interesting. I mean, so when I was in undergrad exercise science, there was a bunch of research that came out about how chocolate milk was like the best post-workout drink. It had the right composition of, carbohydrates and macros and stuff. And so I was doing chocolate milk after every workout because that was the best. And or muscle milk, right? Muscle milk was the other big thing that we drank all the
Classic.
time. Yeah. And then it was like 5 years later, and it's like, man, if I drink dairy, I don't feel so good.
I'm gonna lose it. Yeah. There's a funny, you just reminded me. So I went to the University of New Hampshire, and I was at the gym a lot because I went from being like an athlete full time, and I was like, what do I do with myself now? So I was kind of a gym rat for a while. And there was this guy at the gym who would carry around a gallon of milk, and he would crush the gallon of milk throughout the entire workout. And I just always remember thinking, in one workout, I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, A, how did you just consume that whole thing? B, if I exercise with like even the smidgen of a wrong type of food, I would be out. So
yeah. One of the CrossFit coaches that I'm good friends with, we have an office inside of his gym. He was doing the go mad, a gallon of milk a day, right? Like maybe
that's what he was doing. Maybe that's what it was.
For sure.
Okay. All right. I gotta do more research on that.
Yeah, it was a thing. I don't know if it's still a thing, but it was definitely a thing for a while there.
That's too funny. I mean, does it surprise me? No. I mean, you look at some of the health trends out there, I believe it.
Yep. He was big into it. We actually just talked about it on the last podcast we recorded, how he used to do that.
Funny.
Yeah.
That's too good.
So the other side of my, like, how does this leaky gut, you mentioned inflammation or this, these different things getting into the bloodstream, how does that then play into inflammation? How does that link to autoimmune disease, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a ton of research that shows that the gut and autoimmune conditions are very much correlated. And the reason for that is because 80% of your immune system is in your gut lining. It's the acronym is GALT, GALT, and it's gut associated lymphatic tissue. And so, I mean, that's the most basic way of explaining it, is just that your immune function is mostly prevalent in your GI tract. So if you have any sort of imbalance there or inflammation going on there, you're going to have immune dysfunction. So the research that they look at is also including different types of bacteria and strains of bacteria that are maybe higher in patients with things like rheumatoid arthritis or like lupus, for example. And so they've made these associations between the different types of bacteria in the gut. So there's many connections. And then also the point I was talking about before about how when the proteins and particles that are in the gut move outside the blood into the blood, those are then seen as a foreign invader. And so that's another way of activating the immune response as well.
Yeah, that's the piece I probably think about or talk about the most is
Yeah,
that, it triggers an inflammatory response. And then obviously that neurologic connection between the two has to play somehow or another. And
absolutely. Oh yeah.
you're seeing that now with these neurodegenerative diseases, right? People are talking about gut health and whether they're talking about Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or dementias. How do you think that all ties together? Again, just kind of a brief.
Very closely related. I mean, it's undeniable the impact that the different strains of bacteria in our gut impact. Even, we can talk about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but even just, the way you're able to focus throughout your workday or how motivated you are. I mean, there's a direct correlation between the two. And, there's certain medications that they've done research on too, like acid reducing medications. These are ones that I see so many clients on. And these medications, they reduce stomach acid, they reduce microbial diversity, and they're associated with what maybe a 90% increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. That is not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. And so, these are things that we're researching, the more intense situations of like the Parkinson's, the Alzheimer's. But again, like if you're an everyday, human being, you're just thinking like, gosh, I can't focus, I got brain fog, things like that. Yeah, that's connected to your gut. Absolutely.
Yeah. I have been toying with intermittent fasting, right, as part of my journey down this road. And it's taken some kind of getting used to, like the mental side of not eating all the time. But I wore a glucometer for a little while and I'm watching my blood sugar spike all day. And I was like, this can't be good for you. Like I don't need an insulin response this often. And so we started doing this time restricted eating thing. And it's like my brain clarity is better. Like the only other time I feel that good is right after exercise or if you get like a week off of work and you're just kind of relaxing for a while. Those are the two times where I feel like I'm that sharp. But I can get to the end of a long clinic day and I just, I'm ready to eat or whatever, but like I feel sharp. And I don't know how much of that's like sympathetic driven or if it's a lack of cloudiness. Like I don't know which way that is, but it's interesting to me. Are you seeing that mental clarity side with your clients?
Oh yeah. I mean, you just see, I've seen clients who are just like completely flat even when we first start meeting. And I'm wondering like, are they just warming up to me? Is it, and you can see a personality change over the course of 2 months, just getting someone, optimally from a gut health perspective and eating well and exercising and balancing their blood sugar. Intermittent fasting is so popular. And I mean, Dr. Longo, he's, the pioneer of the research in fasting. And I love to learn about the research there from a, practical perspective of how to implement that into a private practice setting, such as my own. I don't see females doing well on intermittent fasting most of the time. I see it really impacting hormones negatively. I see males do really well on it. I think a lot of that is really just due to the hormone differences. And, when we think about what's happening during fasting is you're teaching your body to use an alternative source of fuel and, ketones. And ketones, can produce a lot of beneficial effects in the body. And then if we talk about gut health and intermittent fasting, we do see some benefits in gut health in the research that we've looked at. How practical it is for people and what they eat when they're not fasting, all those things are also really important to think about because, there is some research that shows that gut bacterial diversity goes down when you're fasting, but then when you refeed, you get into that breaking that fast state, you actually see the benefits of the gut microbiome, for example. So people have to be, really diligent about eating well when they break the fast too, not just, binging on a bunch of fast food and stuff like that, which I'm sure you're not doing, but there are people out there that love the idea of, okay, I'll just starve myself for, 18 hours and then hello, I just get to eat whatever I want.
Yeah. So I actually started my little fasting journey. Dr. Walter Longo, his book, and he's got the Prolon, right? Their kit. And so I did, I listened to his book. I forget the title of the book, but I listened to his book. I did the 3 months of the thing. But I did exactly what you just said. Like, I was like, I'm going to test fasting without doing anything else to my diet. And in their little packet, they're like, on day 6, when you're done with your fast, you have to eat, this, this, and this. I'm like, screw that. I'm eating everything. Yeah.
There you go. So
Yeah.
you're a perfect example of what human beings are like. Like, that's what we do. We don't go, oh, I'll just have a little blueberries, ease back into it, do some wild caught salmon boiled. Like, no, we're going to eat a freaking burger because we're starving.
Yeah. I've seen some of the research
Yeah.
now on Ramadan, right? Because during Ramadan, and what they're finding is exactly what you said, is that people are just feasting right before and right after. And so they're not seeing the benefits that maybe some of these other research studies are seeing, which is also of interest to me. So I want to be respectful of your time here. I don't want to wrap up without kind of a little bit of, what do people do? So not specifically, but what are kind of some of the general topics that you have your clients do, or that things you think about for clients?
So let's just pretend that the client doesn't have SIBO, for example, or like an underlying issue that really should be addressed clinically. Always start with balancing out the diet. So protein, carb, veggie at every meal. I don't see people eating the right amount of protein for their body, and protein is essential for your immune system. It's essential for the integrity of your gut lining. So consistency with balanced meals, more omega-3s. In our Western diet, we have this imbalance of these omega-6s and the omega-3s. We have way too many omega-6s, not enough omega-3s. So more wild-caught fish, flaxseed, chia seed, walnuts, those types of foods we need to bring those up to reduce inflammation and also increase diversity of the gut microbiome. Reducing stress as much as you can. Absolutely. Vitamin D deficiency. I see this a ton. So we really need to be checking vitamin D levels, because if your vitamin D is low, you're going to be at higher risk for heart disease, IBS, IBD, imbalance in the microbiome, hormone imbalance. Vitamin D is responsible for so many different things. What else would I say? Movement. I mean, movement in a way that it really aligns with your body. If you are working a 9 to 5, you have 6 kids, and you are just stressed all the time, it's probably not going to benefit your gut to be adding more intense exercise onto that. So doing things like yoga, meditation, light movement to help stimulate the bowels. What else? Diversifying the diet. So adding in more probiotic rich foods, things like kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, those all are natural food sources of probiotics and can be excellent for the gut. some of my clients will take probiotic supplements, and those can also be really beneficial for some. What else? Do you want me to keep going? I can keep
No, I
going all
think that's
day.
good. I'm glad you mentioned
Okay.
movement, because that's kind of like from our end, that's our passion, is what is the right prescription of movement for the working adults, because it's probably not the same exercise prescription as their favorite bodybuilder on YouTube or their favorite athlete, right? Because that's all those people are doing, where you're living this other life. Where do you think, and again, we'll try to wrap up quick here, but where do you think sleep fits into that? Because
Oh my gosh,
I feel like
sleep.
that's just such an
I've
overrated.
seen so overrated. I do want to come back to though your point about the physical activity. The research that I've seen, too much, you see an imbalance of gut bacteria in a negative way. Just the right amount, you see the perfect balance in gut bacteria. So just to tell people, like, you really can overdo it and it will show up in your gut health.
How are they
Now,
defining that? I'm sorry.
they're looking at no, it's okay. They're looking at, so they have kind of a standard of like, what is the healthy balance of, bacteria in a person's gut, and what levels are of high levels are associated with negative outcomes. And so they're saying, okay, these people who exercise this many days a week actually had lower levels of beneficial bacteria and higher levels of opportunistic bacteria, and then vice versa. Does that make sense?
Do you have any recall of what that volume or intensity was?
Oh no, I'll dig it up though. I mean, it's not
Curious.
that I won't be digging much because I reference it a lot. So I'll
Mhm.
send that to you. I can't remember if they specified exactly how much time. But I will. Yeah, I'll send it to you. Sleep is huge. I mean, the hormone melatonin, even, it acts as an antioxidant, and it's really good for gut health and motility. But I've seen clients make all the dietary change, address any underlying gut imbalances, do all the things, but if their sleep is not good, that's going to impact your cortisol. Cortisol impacts the gut. That's going to impact your eating behaviors. That's going to impact the gut. Your sleep is crucial. I mean, that is your restorative time. When you talk about fasting, when we sleep, that is like our fast. Those really cool, beneficial, biohacking things, those happen when we sleep. And I'll talk about it like a Zamboni to clients. You've got like a Zamboni going through in the middle of a hockey game, right? To clear off the ice. When you're sleeping, that's happening in your brain. You're clearing away plaque and things that have built up from the day. Same for your gut. You need to have rest for your gut, things to clear away the debris from the food that you've eaten to prevent you from getting small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So sleep is so important. I mean, it is very much underrated, and I think we should talk about it more.
Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten very interested into that. I think, part of me saying, okay, some of my health issues seem to have gotten worse as I've gotten older. Is that because I'm getting older? Is it because I'm not sleeping? Because I'm working and doing this and doing that? And then the other thing we've been talking about with our clients all the time is morning workouts are also super popular, right? Like get up at 5 and get your workout in before, at what point is waking up at 4:30 in the morning to get a 5 o'clock workout in almost a disadvantage, assuming you're not going to bed at 9 o'clock or whatever, 8 o'clock the night before. Where is that line of, you need to get your exercise in, you need to get your movement in, but I don't think it can be at the cost of your sleep, because otherwise you're just cooking on both ends of the candle, and eventually something happens.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of the book Why We Sleep by Matthew
That
Walker. It's
Walker, yep.
yeah, great book. And I wear a Whoop, so I'm big into like recovery. Oh, there you go, twins. Are you waiting for your 4.0 still? Because
No, I got it.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, mine's on its way.
I lost my other one because so I was actually just talking about this. The other one, I felt like the battery was dying all the time, and I'd never remember to charge it, and I hated it, and I ended up losing it. And then they sent me the 4.0 because I had the membership, and I love it. Yeah.
I think during the pandemic, everyone became interested in or something, but I've been waiting for the 4.0 for months, and I'm so excited to get it because it's been a game changer. I mean, even when I had COVID, it told me I had COVID before I knew I had COVID. My respiratory rate was through the roof, and I was like, what? I feel fine. I just ran 7 miles. Like, really interesting. But I'm obsessed with recovery, and this is a great tool. And I look at my REM sleep every night. I look at my deep sleep every night, and you can only, like, your body can definitely adapt to, get a certain amount of REM sleep in a shorter amount of time if you have to, if you get in a routine of like less sleep, but your body can only take that for so long and you really can't make up for it. So I always tell my clients, I say, if you have to choose between working out and getting more sleep, choose sleep. There's no reason to put your body in a more inflammatory state. You're not, no matter what your goals are, if you want to get a leaner body, you need to sleep more because you need to rest and recover. So it's never worth it, for the most part, for people to do that. And trust me, I had that mentality back when, and I've learned the hard way.
Yeah. We've been trying to couch it as performance versus health, right? If you're training for
Love that.
performance, maybe you can see where that need to sacrifice a little bit maybe comes in. But if you're just trying to be healthy, I don't think you can win. I don't think you can win if you're not getting the sleep.
I
So
like that. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned it that way. Well, hey, I think that's a good place to wrap up again. I just want to make sure we stay on time here as best we can. I usually try to wrap up with, what do you think you're going to be most interested in this time next year?
Honestly, I think I'm still going to be interested in the gut microbiome. I think the research is only going to continue to become, more in depth and more practical about what we can do. So I think what I'll be doing from an application standpoint with my clients and the care that I'll be able to give, I believe will only enhance over the year, I guess. I think that's probably the best description. And I'm excited to see where it goes, because we're doing like fecal microbial transplants, and that's where it's at right now. So I hope that maybe one day, maybe in a year, who knows, I'll be able to better help my clients with those tools that we're seeing in the research.
Yeah, I forget when I first heard about it, but I was like, that's so crazy. And then you're like, well, wait, they're showing some pretty insane results with this.
Yeah. And it's like, it makes sense, but just the concept of it, obviously people are thinking, how does that work? You just, you get the gist. You have someone else's fecal transplanted into your body. And, it only makes sense that would be the most simple way to have someone's gut better your own health. I mean, really.
Crazy though.
Yeah, I know. It's wild.
But it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I really appreciate you doing this. This was awesome. I wanted to talk to you so much more about insulin and diabetes and how cannabis fits into that whole equation. But maybe if we get the opportunity, we'll do it again sometime.
I would love that. I'm happy to come on for another episode. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. And if people want to learn more about the content, because you have a ton of content on your website, and obviously you have your own podcast as well, where can people find information out about you and kind of dig that up on their own for now?
Yep. Thank you. Nutritionrewired.com. I will say this is something, like, I'm going to brag about this because, you can hire me one-on-one, but I've had people who have said they've just listened to my podcast, follow my content, read my blog posts, and they've significantly felt better from a gut health perspective. So take advantage of that free information, and always reach out if you have any questions. I love hearing from people or connecting with people or hearing your own experiences. But this was super fun, Nick. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope we can do it again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks.